We're back now at 7:43 with a man who has a unique perspective on the current anti-American violence in the Muslim world. 23 years ago, Salman Rushdie watched as protesters raged against his novel, The Satanic Verses in the Middle East. He was marked for death and forced to hide for nearly a decade. Now he writes about his life as a marked man using an alias while living underground in the new memoir, Joseph Anton. Mr. Rushdie, it's a pleasure to have you here. Good morning.
Hello, nice to be here.
This is a story that captured headlines 23 years ago.
Yeah.
Deeply personal story for you, and you haven't told it until now. Why?
Well, partly is because it was so personal, and I wanted to feel emotionally in a better place to tell it. But I always knew that I would tell it, and actually it's that personal story that I think needs to be told. How did a writer and his family and his publishers face up against this extraordinary act of terrorism?
And so many connections to what we're seeing now. But let's try to remind people of the heat that was surrounding you. The Ayatollah Khomeini marked you for death. This is basically a head of state ordering the murder of a citizen of another country. There were credible reports of death squads getting near you. You were even told by law enforcement that they had, quote unquote, frustrated credible plots. What kind of fear were you living in?
Well, it was a time of incredible stress. I mean, a lot of people who knew me then and afterwards said that 10 years later I looked younger than I had at the time. And it's because of that burden, because it wasn't just about me. I was worried about my family. I was worried about my publishers, my translators, booksellers. There was a lot to worry about.
I remember the coverage of the event at the time. I'm old enough to remember. And I remember some storyline that kept coming up, that during this you were living this life, enjoying the money, enjoying the fame, living a combination of a life of like James Bond and David Beckham, the international man of mystery, and being whisked away by limos and things. What was the reality?
Well, that was for me one of the strangest things, that people should attempt to so dramatically distort what was going on. And yes, I think sometimes it did look glamorous. If you arrive in places in a bulletproof Jaguar and a policeman leaps out and opens the door, people think, who the hell is he? What does he think he is? But actually, from my side of it, felt like jail.
And you write a lot about your friends and the fact that throughout this entire ordeal, not one friend ever said to you, Salman, I can't be your friend anymore because you're too much of a hot potato.
Yeah.
And these people risked a lot to protect you.
Yes, I mean, this is one of the things I really take away from that experience is the fact that I survived this because of the love of friends who did extraordinary things for me.
So fast forward 23 years, okay, and we've got a situation in the Middle East right now, and you look at the protests going on in some of these cities, and do you see a connection?
Yes, I mean, one of the reasons why in the book I use this metaphor of the Hitchcock movie, The Birds,
right,
is to say that really what happened to me was like the first bird, and now we're in the middle of the storm.
But what is the connection? I mean, if you remember, the Ayatollah Khomeini had never even read the Satanic Verses when he marked you for death. You look at these people protesting, you think they've never even, by the way, seen that movie?
Well, I mean, I think clearly the video was a flashpoint, and I mean, from what I can see, it was a kind of outrageous, sort of disgraceful, little malevolent thing. But by now, I think the reaction we're seeing is really the release of a much larger outrage. We sort of live in an age of outrage. And people seem to be define themselves by their outrage and seem to feel that it justifies itself.
But is it legitimate outrage in your opinion, or is it manufactured outrage? I think you were talking to one of our producers over the weekend, and you used an expression, you said it's kind of the outrage machine.
Yes, I mean, there's an outrage industry. There are people who look for things to provoke their audiences with. And it's to a large extent manufactured. The fact that you can unleash these violent mobs like this is obviously completely unacceptable.
And consider the fact that when you wrote the Satanic Verses 23 years ago, it was not the age of social media where a message can spread like wildfire.
Absolutely. It's much easier to do that now.
When you look at the creator of this film in question, this internet film, in some ways do you have sympathy for that person, or do you feel that person has done something horribly wrong?
Well, I mean, I think he's done something malicious, and that's a very different thing from writing a serious novel. He's clearly set out to provoke, and he's obviously unleashed a much bigger reaction than he hoped for. I mean, one of the problems with defending free speech is you often have to defend people that you find to be outrageous and unpleasant and disgusting.
So when you saw that man taken in for questioning over the weekend, completely shrouded to mask his appearance, any level of sympathy there?
Not really.
Why not?
Well, because he did it on purpose. I mean, he set out to create a response, and he got it in spades.
Salman Rushdie, interesting perspective, and I can't wait to read more of this book. It's called Joseph Anton.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Nice to be here.